Hello, everyone. Let's take a look at some more very important authors. First of all, Hugo Gernsback was one of the very important Pulp Fiction era people. He started the Amazing Stories, which was a big drive of the Pulp Fiction era for really bringing science fiction to the forefront, good or bad. He was so well versed and so respected that they ended up naming one of the largest science fiction awards that can be awarded to people called the Hugos. So most of the authors afterwards that I'll speak of have probably received Hugos. He actually did a lot of interesting things. He started several publications like the Amazing Stories, but also was credited for numerous things. For example, basically, he was the beginning of the definition of science fiction as its own genre. He was actually, most people would argue, he was responsible for that. He also coined some of the terms. The term science fiction actually is credited to him by most, even though it was seen in a letter a couple of years before, but it was accredited to him in 1929. Also, scientification was also credited to him, as well as science fantasy and speculative fiction are terminology that people felt came from his work or his understanding or introduction of it, as well as he also began the definition of the genre of science fiction and when it began, basically, as well as he had a breakdown of what made a science fiction story. Some would argue good or bad. Many people give him a fair amount of credit, where some people argue that maybe he was a bad impact on science fiction genre because he also positioned it into a specific light that didn't allow others all to come in. But, for example, he argues that the first science fiction writer was Edgar Allan Poe, long before the other big names I already talked about, which I didn't add him to the list because I'm not sure everyone would classify him as a science fiction writer, but it was just interesting that he sort of helped define the genre that way. One of the other interesting facts was that he also he established many of the communities around science fiction. So he created the community of science fiction fandom, as well as the Science Fiction League. So he actually was a big factor for the growth of the industry, good or bad, but from my viewpoint, without growth and challenge, how does the industry move forward? Now, after him, we're going to talk about what they call the big three authors. These are ones who most contribute to the beginning of the what they call the golden age or the golden era of science fiction. So most of them were the ones that grew up with the pulp fiction magazines that we just talked about, but in trade tried to bring the science fiction genre to the forefront, as well as to be honest, before these three I'm about to talk to, the pay in that industry was quite weak in comparison. So they were also part of the reason for the golden age, was the fact that the writing became more respected and things like that. So he was actually the first person to be called what they called the Grand Master. He, of course, won numerous Hugos, as you can see on the screen, and depicted the waterbed and the cell phone. So good examples of some of the information he shared ahead of time. One of the numerous movies he was involved with, but I'm just going to talk about obviously the big ones. So Starship Troopers. If you haven't seen Starship Troopers, you got to do it. A lot of fun. He was also coined several of the phrases, including Space Marine and things like that. So he was actually quite influential in the industry. Sorry, excuse me. And he had, like many of them, some pretty famous quotes I'm just going to read a couple. A critic is a man who creates nothing. Always listen to experts. They will tell you what you can't be done and why, then do it. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. So there's just a couple of his more famous quotes. He wrote a fair amount of publications and a fair amount of books, and pretty much received every award you could think of as far as science fiction genre went. Just another couple things. He was also added certain terms that were then brought into the English language, like grok, Waldo, pay it forward, space marine, were examples of terms that he brought into existence in the English language, or was credited for. Now let's take a look at another one of the big three, Arthur C. Clarke. He was an explorer from a very early age. He, not to mention, he lived quite a long life. I believe it was 91 years, and died in 2008. So he was there at the very beginning type period of the golden age, and then got to see the genre explode and become what it is today. Some of his biggest books, which also became movies, were 2001: A Space Odyssey, obviously, and 2010. Both movies I've seen, which I recommend if you haven't. Definitely be worth doing. So a couple of his famous quotes. The limits of the possible can only be defined by going beyond them into the impossible. It has yet to be proven that intelligence has any survival value. I thought that one was kind of interesting. And of course, one that actually, I think one or two you actually quoted in Discussion Board 1. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. One of the most famous quotes. And then he also was a fair amount of, he liked to bring in his political beliefs as well, or his that aspect of it. The greatest tragedy in mankind's entire history may be the hijacking of the morality by religion. So he obviously had some strong opinions that way. He also, the amount of awards he received, as well, he was knighted in Sri Lanka. He's very well renowned across the world as one of the big three, and he also often was credited as the prophet for space age. Isaac, I don't believe there's a writer that wrote more than this man. To have over 500 books, thousands, and I mean thousands of publications, as well as was credited as, or estimated to have written over 90,000 letters. I mean, this is a gentleman that his whole life was based around writing. I don't know if anyone wrote more than him. Movie-wise, some of his biggest movies would have been Bicentennial Man, which had Robin Williams in it, which was more of a comedy-based, and then the one that I'm sure a lot of you have seen is I, Robot, the one with Will Smith. Those are his stories. And I like a few of the quotes from him as well over the years. I do not fear computers, I fear the lack of them. Never let your sense of morality get in the way of doing what's right. That's one I think that's is a great one, or one I personally respect a lot. And then self-education is, I firmly believe, the only kind of education there is. I do believe it's important that we put forward our best foot when it comes to education, because if the concept of you can lead a horse to water but you can't make them drink, I find to be very true. If you put the work in and you're willing to learn, you can. So I like some of the quotes there as well. And I mean, the quantity he has written is literally off the charts. And he was an educator as well, and he was actually classified, his books were classified as to have been written in 9 out of 10 of the different Dewey Decimal classifications. So that's also almost unheard of as well. So just thought I would share what I classify as the big three plus Hugo. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.